welcome to the Lit Up Lightworker Podcast, bringing you fun and soulful interviews with spiritual teachers with the aim of tuning you in and lighting you up. You can access all episodes of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn, and be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos and interviews all about finding and following your life purpose. My name is George Lizos. I'm a spiritual teacher, intuitive, the author of Be the Guru and the #1 best-selling Lightworkers Gotta Work. And today I have with me Remington Donovan. Remington Donovan is a master numerologist and mystic seer trained in the spiritual wisdom of the ancients. He was quite literally born into the traditions of mysticism, spirituality, and meditation, which naturally evolved into his now 30 years of experience practicing with tarot and numerology. Along with performing thousands of private readings, Remington teaches and speaks all over the world. He hosts the Mystical Artists podcast and leads the Mystical Arts Mystery School, and his book Numerology, A Beginner's Guide to the Spiritual Meaning of Numbers, is out now. Remington, welcome to the Lit Up Lightworker Podcast.
George, it's an honor to be here. Super exciting. And and also you're in Cyprus, which is on my list of places I really want to visit.
I want to learn about what the Kabbalah is, because it's so it brings in so many different aspects. But for someone who's a total beginning, how would you describe it very simply?
I mean, it's a methodology, and it's, ultimately it's a tool and a process of your own self-discovery and your sort of in hermetic or ceremonial magic contents. It's one of the tools that we use to access what is your true will, which is like in modern context is like your high destiny, and in old language would be what is God's will for you? Meaning, what the heck was I born to do? Who am I? What was I born to do? And then the Kabbalah becomes an integral part of that process. And for me, it's one of the tools, and it simply roots. Its first impression would be the tree of life. And then that tree, which sort of starts with something called Kether as the crown, this energy moves down. So in a way, it's a tool of manifestation. It's the flow of the universe. It's the symbolism of the universe. And tarot, what a lot of people don't know is tarot. I'm talking 78 card tarot, not like oracle decks, is the tree of life. So all tarot readers are practicing Kabbalists, but it's just a way to, the way it was taught to me is one of the tools to unravel those layers and those illusions and get to the core and the essence of, oh, this is me. Here's some of my purpose, and here's what I could be doing. So it also is a tool to give tremendous maneuverability and empowerment in the world, as well as, self-discovery.
Kabbalah is, the way I understand it from how you explained it, it's a multidisciplinary system, esoteric system that combines different tools and different concepts and frameworks, such as the tarot, astrology, numerology, the tree of life, to understanding ourselves, the world, and finding our will and purpose, and also manifesting our desire. So it's essentially, it's more than just a tool. It's a combination of tools and a way of living and understanding the world. Is that right?
Yeah, really well said, actually. Thanks for that, because it's like such a broad spectrum topic. But yeah, and I learned it in a very practical way. So use these things in your life. For example, maybe I'm just being too fat and lazy, and I can't get anything done. Well, what is that a symptom of in Kabbalah? Well, that would most likely be Hesed, too much mercy, right? I'm being too gentle, right? We always hear make sure we take time for self-care. And I always joke, you can self-care your way into oblivion. Now, and sometimes we want to rest and whatever, but so I know that's the number 4, that's the color blue, that's the planet Jupiter. Okay, I'm being a little soft. I got to get a lot done, a lot of work. So let me use the opposite spectrum of that, which is red, which is 5, which is Mars, which is Gabora. And now I'm like, okay, I'm going to sort of dust off the cobwebs. I'm going to get off the couch. I'm going to get moving. And then I apply tenacity, I apply work, diligence, gumption, and that's going to come from Saturn, which is Binah. But then I could go deeper and deeper, that it becomes a method almost of psychology and self-discovery, because you start to see where am I a little deficient? Where do I have too much of something? And Kabbalah, we're striving for balance and coming center and staying aligned and attuned with like in my language would be our holy guardian angel, but it's really just our highest selves, that we sort of know what we're supposed to be doing. We know it's right. And so it really comes down to so much self-discovery. That's how it was taught to me.
So it's essentially like it's a spiritual diagnostic system. That's how I understand it from what you just said. So something's going on, something's not working out, or I want to create something, and I'm going to use this framework of understanding myself and the world, tap into those frequencies that are connected to so many different layers. It's numbers, it's planets, it's different aspects, and find a way to what? How do you draw in that energy?
Well, I mean, those everything you just described is just very accurate. That process in of itself starts to just expand your consciousness, and so as your consciousness expands, you sort of come into the right spot, and we change. In Hermetic magic, we change our frequency. One of the first things I was taught is whatever it is that you want, like our job is to make ourselves a fit receptacle. Right. So I'd like a job, I'd like to write a book. I want the book to be a New York Times bestseller, right? Because we're both writers and things like that. Well, what is it in my frequency? And then what is the work that? Well, first thing you got to do is write the book, right? Because you're not gonna. So it's just the process of like looking at the symbols. Like I could look at this little Christmas decoration, and say, well, that's green. Okay, well, that's Venus. That's my sensuality, my romance, my art, my creativity. And as my mind starts to go in that direction, I can start to just learn so much. It really starts with learning about yourself, because how are you going to be a fit receptacle for a greater success if you have all this sort of clutter that you're unconscious of? But doing numerology, which is what my book is, that process just expands you, where you start to know. So maybe you are seeing a certain color everywhere you go. Let's say you're seeing black, right? Black is Binah. That's the great mother. And maybe you're seeing it in a weird context. Well, black is also the number 3. It's the planet Saturn. So now okay, everywhere I go, I keep seeing 3s everywhere. Well, okay, is there some unresolved mommy issues, right? Is there something, or it's Saturn, which is about work. So it's like, oh, maybe I need to get to work. Maybe I need to focus. Maybe I need to be more disciplined. So these messages come, you just start getting good at deciphering the signs, but ultimately it's all for your own spiritual growth. The great work, which is the term in this tradition, in the ceremonial magic tradition, and that loosely is union with God. And then in Eastern traditions that I grew up with, this notion of enlightenment, but becoming our highest, most divine self, regardless of the language you want to put in there. And I can't comment on a lot of the ancient Greek, which I'm very interested in. But we're probably doing very similar things, because you have a code, you have these symbols, and you see how those gods appear and manifest in nature. And
Yes,
so
and when you look at Hermeticism, which is a blend of Egyptian and Greek philosophy, when you look into what the Hermetists believe and you read the ancient texts, they actually draw from Plato, or they draw from all the different ancient philosophical schools in both ancient Greece and Egypt, because the Greeks essentially borrowed from the Egyptians as they went, and they got all this knowledge. So eventually it got all mixed up, and it got like unified in some way. And I guess that's what the Kabbalah tries to do, bring everything together.
Yeah, it's like gives you a little better framework, because now you could look at a color or a planet and attribute a god. Like, for example, yellow, you could attribute to Tiferet, which is the sixth Sephirah, which is the sun in the sky. Now, that also is considered the sacrificed god. So that really roots to Osiris in ancient Egypt, which then later became the mythology of Christ. You know, you sort of, Osiris died and was a human and transformed his energy and became a god, especially through the magic of Isis. Even a lot of Catholicism draws on that, you know, and then there's Kabbalah with a C, which has implications of mystic Christianity. But what I learned is definitely tied into the Greek. I was just less trained in that language. I was taught that before one could study with Pythagoras, you had to take a vow of silence for 5 years, which was always like my teacher's joke to like, just be quiet, listen, don't block the energy, allow it to come to you.
Yes, that's the issue. Well, it's and also the hidden blessing of mystical schools in the ancient times. They were mystical because they were not written down. Everything was taught from the master to the teacher, and then that's how they ended up to the present moment. Because, as you know, many of them ended up being underground and then still training people. And there actually is the Pythagorean mystical school still active in Greece. I tried to get in, they wouldn't let me.
Well, I guess not your destiny. I don't, yeah, I like, you know, a lot of what I was taught was a lot of the Egyptian symbolism. But then I also learned not Hebrew as a spoken language, but I know the alphabet really well because that ties into numerology, gematria, which is, you know, different letters have different values, things like that. So I really, then you just open up another door of expanding your consciousness, and there's so much that you can learn just right on your own. But then there's the Greek, and I'm only familiar with a little bit of that, and that just never became available to me. But the numerology of the Greek letters, which also you can start to connect in with the Hebrew. And again, like you said, it, you know, some level, and what I was taught is that on this planet, you know, before, you know, we had Atlantis, we had Lemuria, we had Mu. That's the mythology of it. But Egypt was the last known living civilization that we can sort of academically prove. And we know that those mysteries, that magic just came through. And the Greeks, I mean, I was in Alexandria in these caverns below the earth to see that at that point, a lot of the Egyptian magic had sort of faded. And then this was like the land of Alexandria trying to recreate it and bring it and restore it. But it was interesting to see. I don't know if you've been there, but the artwork, you're like, oh, this looks kind of Greek. It's like Greek interpretations of the ancient Egyptian and even the artwork. I actually really love that style. And Alexandria just has an energy. That city is wild.
I love how Kabbalah just brings everything together as a universal system that's not religious, it's not tied to something specific, it just helps you understand like universal wisdom and how everything works. Now, what would be your recommendation to someone just starting out exploring the Kabbalah? Because it's such a huge topic, some people may be feeling like overwhelmed, like where do I start? So for a beginner, where would they start?
Well, my book, not even trying to plug it, it's a start of numerology, but I tie in the Kabbalah. And so when you start to see numbers and attribute colors and planets, because then you're dealing with Greek and Roman and things like that, that will start to unravel those mysteries. Another book that was recommended to me, I don't feel like it's a page turner of a read, but there's very good information, and I love her, Dion Fortune, who is English. There was a big revival in England as well in the early 1900s with a lot of this work, late 1800s, early 1900s. And her book, The Mystical Kabbalah, is a great framework. And that is very accurate in accordance to the tradition I was taught. So I can rely on her, because a lot of times you start Googling stuff and people, it's very apparent someone wasn't trained, they don't know, or they're just pulling in too much loose information. But even, like Kabbalah, which might be more rooted in Judaism, or people think that Kabbalah is all about Judaism or something. I've met those Kabbalists too that happen to also be Jewish, and they will definitely tell you it's not Judaism. And that there's sort of the ancient Hebrew were really a sort of caste of sages and magicians, and it just was powerful magic. But it all comes through. Pythagoras was on some level teaching that, but also, how I grew up learning about all these different religions, you realize, oh, it's just the same teachings come through that cultural language. But those are two good books. My Patreon is a great way to start. I do a lot of workshops, and it's just such a broad, it's so endless. Like every number is infinite.
I love that. Thank you so much for introducing us to Kabbalah. It's such a fascinating topic, so much to explore. And I was wondering whether you can share with us a little bit about how can people get in touch with you, get the book, and how can people work with you? You mentioned Patreon. What are some other places?
My Instagram is The Mystical Arts, or if you just Google Remington Donovan, like a lot of those links will come up and through my website. But the book is available pretty worldwide.
All the links will be in the show notes below for everybody to check out. Remington, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I really enjoyed our chat.